Hello, beautiful soul family. Rebecca here, your vibe mentor, bringing you another video on how to raise your vibration so you can live your best life. I am a little bit under the weather, feeling fine, but very hoarse. So pardon my voice today, but we are rolling with it. So we're going to talk about self-blame today. Self-blame is a hallmark of complex trauma, the unworthiness wound, the belief in lack, however you want to call it. Don't let the big T word turn you off. If you struggle with self-blame or that really strong inner critic, this video is for you. But before we jump into that, I want to remind you the doors to the new Earth Construction team are open. We would love to welcome you in. We open the doors on 11/11. So if you join right now, you would be considered a founding member as we build up the foundation of this community. We are digging into how to heal this block or this wound of not enoughness or unworthiness or fear of being seen, whatever it is that makes you play small. It's keeping you from your purpose. And your purpose is your path to abundance, which will assist in creating heaven on earth. So if you've had that calling, you want to start your own business, you know you're meant to be an entrepreneur, you know how to do it up here, but you can't quite seem to make it happen, self-sabotage, overwhelm, shut down, fear of rejection, fear of being seen, all these things get in the way. That is because there is something in you. It's called complex trauma. It is housed in the body, and no amount of talk therapy will resolve it. Yes, that is 50% of the equation, but you require a somatic healing. And I do something called brain spotting, a proven psychology modality that will help heal that trauma, get it up and out of the body so that you can step into your purpose, manifest abundance, and literally live the dream that has been put on your heart, because it was put there by the divine to lead you towards your purpose so that you can assist in building heaven on earth. We would love to have you there. I have done this because I know that my coaching and course programs are expensive, and I want to make it very, very accessible. $20 a month is something that we cannot ignore. We cannot make excuses for. This is a safe community where you absolutely will heal and grow, and maybe even do something big to help change the world. So we'd love to see you there. Link is below. All right, so let's talk about self-blame. Self-blame is a sneaky one. Man, does it sneak in under the guise of the virtuous ego perspective that says, oh, poor me, right? It's very similar to that victim mentality, except that we feel if we are somehow self-flatulating, then that's not quite what I meant to say, but it's funny, so we're going to leave it. Self-flatulation. If we are beating ourselves up, if we are constantly blaming ourselves, then we feel we are somehow being virtuous or we are somehow going to solve the problem. But the truth is, it is a defense mechanism. It was developed when we were in that traumatic moment, right? I do the big T like this because it causes people to just kind of shut down and say, well, I don't have trauma. But the truth is, if you did not feel safe, seen, heard, cared for, or loved for an extended period of time, you likely are dealing with some sort of complex trauma. You are not alone. This is a human condition. The whole world felt unsafe for 2 years due to COVID. So this is the human condition. This is not something that makes you bad or wrong or broken. So again, if we're talking about self-blame, if this is of interest to you, there's likely already something in you saying, there's something wrong with me. It's my fault, right? But it is the illusion. It was developed as a form of control to overpower or to help regain power in that situation where we felt helpless, but it is an illusion. It is an illusion of control, and it is a mechanism of the ego, right? It prevents us from working through the trauma, and it can be healthy to have some level of self-awareness, self-responsibility. I don't want to say self-blame is healthy, but owning it, right? Taking responsibility for your role in things certainly is helpful, and it is necessary, but it can be taken to toxic levels of self-blame, right? And that is a trauma symptom. It's a trauma response. It's toxic when we take responsibility for things we didn't do. It's toxic when we take responsibility for others and what they did. It's toxic when we take responsibility for protecting others from what it is that we need to say or to ask for or to have our needs met, right? Self-blame is very common in sexual abuse. It's especially common for neglect victims. Right, again, if you didn't feel safe, seen, heard, cared for, or loved, that is neglect. If it can be present in mild cases where we just felt like we weren't seen enough. We didn't get enough attention, right? So complex trauma is not necessarily defined by how severe a situation was, but rather by how the person perceives what they experienced. So if the little 2 or 3-year-old version of you did not feel safe or seen, even though your parents say you were safe and seen, that's okay. It does not negate what happened. That you have a need. And we grew up in a society that told us that our needs were invalid, or they needed to be pushed down or ignored, or we needed to suck it up, or, buckle up, buttercup, bootstrap it, whatever it was that was said to you. It doesn't make it true. Just because that's the way of the world at that time does not make it valid or right. That you had a right to have your needs met. And even to this day, you deserve, not only do you deserve to have your needs met, but you must have your needs met in order to be at the highest vibration that is necessary to really tap into your innate gifts, that you were made perfectly imperfect for a purpose. You are here for a reason. The world needs that gift that only you have to offer. And you cannot do that if you don't have your needs met, right? Oftentimes, your needs were denied, or you were told to deny your needs. And also you were told to deny how you felt. We were not able to express how suffocating that indication of not being able to feel and not being able to have our needs met felt. So then there is suppressed hurt and anger and betrayal and abandonment and rejection that we stuff down. And of course, we aren't being given the proper soothing and maternal nurturing that is necessary. And so we don't understand how to do that for ourselves, right? We didn't have the model, so we can't understand how to do that for ourselves. And so this self-perpetuates throughout our entire life, right? And our brain, in an effort to try to keep us safe, was scanning the world and trying to figure out, what can I control? And it recognizes I can't control these other people around me, but I can control myself. And so it makes you the problem. It makes what you need a problem. It makes who you are a problem. Now, other sources will say that children believe that the world revolves around them. And so that's why they take on this belief that you're somehow unworthy. And whether or not it was because the world revolves around you, or because your brain determined you were the only thing it controlled, either way, the outcome was that you were the source of the problem. And so you and who you were, who you needed, who you are and what you needed was suppressed. It was pushed down. And then on top of that, all of these suppressed emotions, and then any traumas. So you can just kind of imagine this compactor pushing and pushing and pushing. And eventually your body is full and there's nowhere for it to go. It's called the diathesis model. It's when the example is a cup that overflows with water. You have poured too much in, you have suppressed too much. And what happens? You break. You overflow. You cannot contain it. So coping mechanisms are necessary. We might be addicted to alcohol or drugs or shopping or social media or sex or, gambling or gossip, whatever it is, to distract yourself, to numb out those feelings of pain and that knowing deep inside you that something isn't right. Right? In some cases, we were explicitly blamed for whatever problem it might have been. They will say to you, if you didn't do XYZ, then this consequence wouldn't have happened. Or they'll say, quit making stuff up, or stop crying. It doesn't hurt. What's wrong with you? If you don't stop what you're doing, I'm going to leave you here. That was one my parents always used, right? I was going to be left on the side of the road if I didn't stop fighting with my brother. Right? When we grow up learning to blame ourselves, it creates toxic self-criticism. That's where that inner critic voice comes in. I like to call it the trauma brain or the trauma voice. Sometimes when I'm dealing with an excess amount of sort of a resurgence, because it mostly goes away, but sometimes, especially in your Scorpio season during the eclipses, it can come up, right? And so I like to imagine this little trauma demon, as I call it. You imagine the angel and the demon sitting on your shoulders. And so I will separate myself from it, because it is a toxic inner voice that is not part of you. And it's maladaptive. It is not healthy. It serves no purpose. There is never any reason for any kind of negative self-talk ever. No amount of beating yourself or blaming yourself will ever solve the problem. In fact, it encourages and reinforces the cycle, the neural pathways, and attaches you to that habit. And it just reinforces the whole cycle. So typically, we'll have thoughts like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm broken, I'm worthless. It ultimately leads to low self-worth. And we will continue to degrade our sense of self and our sense of value and worth over time as we continue to allow these thoughts to happen. Self-blame creates perfectionism and unrealistic expectations or high standards that cannot be met. It comes with black and white thinking, very rigid thinking, inflexible thinking that leads to you easily being triggered or overwhelmed when things change or not as you anticipated or planned. We may say or think things like, I always fail, I can never do anything right, everything's bad, everything's wrong. I don't know about you, but when I was first discovering the trauma and cognitive behavioral therapy, I would notice in those moments in between waking and sleeping, when I first woke up in the morning, my brain instantly, before I was really even fully conscious, it was that in-between space where my brain was trying to figure out, where are we at and what do we need to do today? It was always looking for what's wrong. What happened yesterday? What should I feel bad about? What do I need to look out for today? Most often the thought was, what do I need to feel bad about? And it was really shocking. That was one of my first awakening moments of feeling like I had been in a dark room my entire life. And then all of a sudden waking up and someone had just turned on the light bulb and I could see my thoughts for the first time. It was like, holy shit, I cannot believe at that point, 27 years of living completely unconscious, completely unaware of what was happening in my brain. And to recognize that we have 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day, 70 to 80% of them are repeated, and they're mostly negative when you are in this trauma loop, right? Chronic self-blame also leads to, obviously, self-doubt. We'll have thoughts like, what if I fail? I'm not sure I can do this. What if I'm doing it wrong? What if I do something wrong? What if I do anything wrong? What if anything I do is wrong? And that was the eggshell that I walked on. Constantly worried about who's going to be upset about the thing I did wrong. What did I do wrong? And it never really mattered whether or not I actually did something wrong. I somehow connected the proof of my failure to how other people responded, which, as we know, if you follow me, how someone responds says everything about how they're feeling and their internal environment and very little about you. And if we have an honest talk with ourselves, an honest conversation, we can see whether or not we actually did do something that deserves or needs, I won't even say deserves, that needs correction, right? I'm going to give you a quick pause while I go get the pizza out of the oven for the kids, and I will be right back. We are back. All right. So self-blame can also lead to poor self-care, and even so much as self-harm. We feel like we don't deserve self-care. We didn't have anyone modeling to us what it looks like to be nurtured and cared for. And so we learn to not nurture and care for ourselves. Sometimes it will even go as far as self-harm. And sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes it's as much as cutting our arms or attempting suicide. Other times it may be subconscious in the way of putting ourselves in the way of harm, putting ourselves in toxic relationships, drinking too much, eating too much, things that are subtly, seemingly normal, I guess we'll say subtle, also socially acceptable. We somehow justify self-harm, but really it is self-abandonment and not showing up for ourselves. And we do this because we didn't receive love. We didn't receive someone caring for us and teaching us how to be nurtured, how to receive nurturing, caring, loving behavior. So we don't do it for ourselves. This also leads to codependency, where we are over giving and we are looking for validation in the other. We're looking for someone to prove to us that we deserve that love. We over give so that they will give to us, and yet it doesn't ever lead to that. It leads to our self-abandonment and being abused and taken advantage of. We take care of them, hoping that they will take care of us in return, and that never happens. That is a maladaptive response. We subconsciously believe that we're not even worthy of receiving love. There is, again, partially that level of self-doubt and self-blame that we tell ourselves that we deserve to be in this relationship where we're abandoned, or we are not cared for, not respected, where love and nurturing is not reciprocated. And so we will stay in those relationships until it literally starts to cause us physical harm. Some even believe that they need the punishment, right? That you deserve to be abused. And then we even verbally abuse ourselves in the worst possible way. Our internal self-talk is the worst. We would never, ever even dream of speaking to someone outside of us that way. And yet we are horrible to ourselves. Unhealthy relationships are another symptom. Again, we're desperately seeking and searching for proof that we are enough, proof in someone else that we are lovable. We're looking to someone else to take care of us, to give us that self-love and that self-care that we refuse to give to ourselves, or we don't know how to give to ourselves, I should really say, because that's where it starts. I remember when someone said to me, you got to love yourself. I'm like, how the heck? Other than looking in the mirror and going, I love you. What does that mean? What does that even mean? So if you have that question, definitely check out the self-love, self-care video, because there were some aha moments for me when I finally realized, I get this, right? I finally understand how to show up for myself and to stop self-abandoning, right? We get into unhealthy relationships because we lack boundaries. We didn't have boundaries modeled to us. We don't know what they are. And if someone did have a boundary, but maybe it was a porous boundary, they modeled was foregoing boundaries or crossing boundaries, right? And again, that's intimately connected with self-care and that lack of showing up for ourselves. Again, also connected with codependency and looking for our value and worth in someone else. We will people please, overgive, self-sacrifice. We have a victim mentality, and we may even have symptoms of learned helplessness. Now, if you struggle with the victim mentality or learned helplessness, I would encourage you to look at what you get from that. If you have a perpetuating cycle of self-doubt or self-blame, if you have negative thought loops that you cannot seem to get under control, even after understanding cognitive behavioral therapy, and even after really strengthening your relationship with the divine, you still struggle with this, I would encourage you to look at, what do you get from that? Everything we do, even if it's a positive or a negative behavior, we do for a reason. You could say, a justifiable reason for why we do it, meaning that we are trying to meet a need. There is some need that is met by that thing that we do. And so we need to understand what that need is, what need is being met, so that we can learn how to meet that need in a resourceful way, right? Most commonly, high levels of toxic self-blame are accompanied by chronic shame, guilt, anxiety, and depression. We will struggle with overwhelmingly painful, intrusive thoughts and feelings, loneliness, isolation, confusion, lack of motivation, aimlessness, paralysis, hypervigilance, or hypoarousal. So you can be so hypervigilant that you're kind of white knuckling the steering wheel of life, trying to keep everything under control, very stressed. You'll notice a high level of tension in your shoulders, constantly on edge, trying to figure out what's the next problem that's going to come and what solution do I need to put in place so that I can anticipate and get ahead of and solve this problem. And then hypoarousal is, again, a more depressed state, very lethargic, lackadaisical, again, aimless, lack of motivation, things of that nature. There will also be overthinking, catastrophizing, and living in your head. That was one that I can really identify with as well. I remember that moment, the moment right before the light bulb came on, saying to a friend of mine, I just happen to have a lot of psychology friends. Can't figure out why. Of course, now that I'm in the profession, I understand. But I said to her, I feel like I'm trapped in my head. I feel like I'm in a prison. I just keep going round and round and round, trying to solve these problems, and I can never get off this hamster wheel. And it was truly like a prison living in my head. So then finally we get to talk about how do we heal this, right? So that's what it looks like. That's how it shows up. How do we heal toxic self-blame? Number one is learn to separate, because usually if you have high levels of trauma, or if you have really struggled with that feeling of unworthiness, the fear of being seen, fear of rejection, fear of showing up, playing small, right, shrinking back, it usually you don't have too much of a challenge identifying where you need to take responsibility, right? That kind of comes with a high level of integrity, wanting to do the right thing, even going to great lengths to do the right thing, so much so that we hurt ourselves. But I have to say it in case there are some who are not honest with themselves. So we really need to start to be honest with ourselves, but not blaming ourselves. They can be separated. And so we want to separate our true core nature, our soul, our higher self, from the toxic self-blame, the trauma voice, the trauma demon, whatever you want to name them, right? Give them a name. And that's number 2. So 7 ways to heal. Number 1, separate responsibility from self-blame. Number 2, name that critical voice. Name Bob, Joe, Tim, Sally, I don't care, whatever you want to call it, but give it a name so that you see the separation from yourself. You are not that. That trauma voice is very maladaptive. It is very unresourceful. It will never, ever help you from this point forward. It may have helped you survive while you were in that trauma, but how long have you been out of that situation? Is it time to let it go? Now, of course, I will preface it by saying if you are still in the war zone, you have to be hypervigilant. You have to have a voice of survival, but it does not require a voice of self-blame. Okay. Yes, there are those moments where you have to look back and say, I didn't acknowledge the red flags. I didn't have boundaries. I didn't show up for myself, but we forgive ourselves for that. We acknowledge it and we make a commitment to doing that going forward. Nowhere in there is self-blame necessary. An acknowledgement is necessary, not self-blame. Okay. Number 3, cognitive behavioral therapy works. It is one of the most underrated therapies out there. It basically is just watching your thoughts, understand your thoughts, be cognitive of your thoughts, right? So cognitive behavioral therapy, be cognitive of the thoughts that create your behaviors, right? So that's where that name comes from. And the process, CBD process, is also number 4, identify, catch, and replace the beliefs that create the thoughts. So as you get intimately familiar with your thoughts, you're aware of them, you're watching them. The next step then is to understand what drives those thoughts. Underneath those thoughts are the beliefs. The beliefs are the foundation of your entire life. There is nothing more important. Well, I won't say that. One of the most important things to manifest with intention and to start turning your life around is to understand your thoughts. So your thoughts are your foundation, right? It's the ground that you build your house on. Is it sand or is it brick? Is it broken stone or is it solid rock? We need a solid rock foundation. And the only way to do that is to create positive, resourceful beliefs. So if you notice the trail of thought starts to happen around blaming yourself for something, you're starting to watch that thought. You then go into what drove that thought? What do I believe about myself? Do I believe that I'm broken? Do I believe that I'm inherently flawed? Do I believe that everything's always my fault or I always fail? Those are beliefs that we need to catch and replace. And the replacement is the opposite, right? And that leads us into what should be, and it's had to have it a little out of order, but I'm going to move it around. What should be number 5 is having grace for yourself, right? Self-compassion. When we make a mistake, we have to remember you are only human. You deserve to make mistakes. I love, 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 love improv for anxiety. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It was amazing to get up on stage and to be given, a small sentence or two to set up the frame and then have to engage with the person fully, obviously shooting from the hip, right? It's called improv, right? I don't know what this person's going to say. They're going to tell me that I'm riding naked on a pink elephant and you can't say no. The number 1 rule of improv is you can't say no. You have to say yes and I might fumble over my words. I might come up with something really ridiculous and silly. I might make a mistake, but that's part of the game. When you make a mistake, you take a bow and you laugh and you giggle and you have grace for yourself and say, well, I'm only human, right? It's not a game of perfection. Nothing in life is perfect. In fact, one of the few things that you can always count on in humanity is error, flaws, right? We are not flawless. That's struggling with that one. And then number 6 is see all of the parts of yourself, right? Know that the part of you that might be blaming yourself in that moment is a wounded part of you. It's a hurt part of you. It might be a 5-year-old part of you. It might be a 2-year-old part of you. It might be a 14-year-old part of you that I highly encourage you look at, I believe, the video on archetypes. I forget what I named that, but I think if you search archetypes, you should be able to find that. We have all of these different aspects in us, right? We have the lover, we have the warrior, we have the jokester, we have the magician, right? That see yourself as parts. This whole being is a library of different resources. Your heart is a resource, your lung is a resource, your inner child is a resource, your warrior is a resource, your magician is a resource. So the part of you that had an error or had a flawed thought or made a mistake, it's okay. That the whole of you is perfectly perfect, perfectly imperfect, the way it is, made with intention and purpose for a reason. And so every aspect of you is perfect. I can't come up with a better word. There is nothing wrong with you. There's zero parts of you deserve rejection or fracture or judgment or criticism. They might need healing. They might need love. They likely need support, but they are not bad, wrong, or broken, right? And that leads me to number 7, which can be a bit of a complex way of thinking, but it is the most important part. And it has everything to do with how you see yourself. That if you are one with the divine, you are one with your creator, you are one with the consciousness. I like to use the term watcher with my kids, right? Who's watching your thoughts? Who's watching the dream? Who's watching the movie? It's your consciousness. That's who you really are. And your consciousness is part of the consciousness, the one, the all, the creator that created everything that is. So if you are one with your creator, you are one with everything created. You are one with abundance. You are one with infinite perfection. You cannot be anything but whole and complete, just as you are. That also means that you are being lived. You are not the doer. It is not your fault that all of these things happened. You are influenced by life. You are being lived by life. And just the same as if you were the finger on the body of God, you are no separate from your creator or the divine, the universe, however you want to see it, it doesn't matter. So this finger cannot act alone. It has to have the muscles to move the finger, the heart to pump the blood to the muscles, the brain to tell the muscles when to move. You are intimately connected with all of life in that same way. And so it would be silly and maybe even arrogant of the ego to think that you alone are responsible for all of this. You have a hall pass. You have been given permission to put down self-blame. It is not your fault. You cannot control anything really other than your willingness and your belief to get the mind under control. The mind is the Maya, is the illusion, is the veil, is the separation, is the lack. This is all we need to address, and everything else will fall into place. Please stop blaming yourself. It is not your fault. You deserve to have your needs met. You deserve to be supported. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. And anyone who does not give that to you is an inaccurate reflection of your value and worth and does not deserve to be in your presence, because it is a privilege and an honor to connect with you, to speak to you, to be graced with your presence and your energy. Please start seeing yourself as valuable and put down the toxic self-blame that keeps you and everyone else from seeing your beauty. Because truly you are amazing. You are gorgeous. You are perfect. Every ounce of you, perfectly imperfect for your purpose. And we need you. You have something that the world needs, and we can't do it. There's only one Michael Jordan. There's only one you. Come to the other side. It's so much better over here. I love you. If you need any support in this, the New Earth Construction team is the place to be. This is where we address all of these things. We do kind of a healthy balance of like, let's heal, let's, do the shadow work. Let's do the masculine cognitive processing along with the feminine brain spotting processing. I should also say, I'm not sure I even mentioned that. Healing trauma is a huge part of getting rid of the self-blame, right? That the self-blame comes from the trauma. And so in order to do that, you need a somatic therapy. And brain spotting is the modality that I've chosen because that healed and literally saved my life. But there is other things called EMDR, breathwork, things of that nature. But in the New Earth Construction team, we will focus on the healing. We'll do some brain spotting, but we also balance that with a fun other side. The other half is, what's your purpose? What do you want to create? What do we want to build? What systems do we need to put into place, right? And because we've only been open for about a week now, we're still coming up with those ideas. So we would love for you to come collaborate, brainstorm, let's play, let's have fun, let's create together. All right, the doors are open. My arms are open to you. I love that the acronym sounds like NEST because it is a safe place. And I will promise you, I will hold my wings of nurturing and safety over this nest for you to keep you safe. So come join us. All right. I love you, my friends, and I will see you on the next video. Namaste.